Hello. I'm glad you made it here tonight.
In a moment, I'll share a story with you, one meant for your sleep.
This story is made to be heard with your eyes closed, because while you sleep, it goes straight into your subconscious. She is calm but powerful. She will change the way you see the world. It will plant new seeds in your mind, ideas of prosperity.
So lie down there, snuggle up, relax.
Because the balloon is going up now, and history will take you with it.
Here, the stories are not just tales. They are keys. Keys that open doors in your subconscious, planting seeds of calm, hope, and prosperity. Listen with an open heart. Let the words flow like a smooth river. And, if you want, come back tomorrow, because repetition, it transforms. She reconstructs. She makes the world inside you grow. The first sound of morning was always the creak of the window. Darren, with hands calloused from years of quiet labor, opened it slowly, as if afraid to wake the silence that filled his small room. The air outside carried the scent of damp wood and dust mixed with the faint sweetness of wild honeysuckle from the alley below. The room was bare, a single bed, a chipped mirror, a table with 3 legs, and one folded book resting on top. No clocks, no phones, no distractions. Just a man, a breath, and a day waiting to begin. He sat up, not in a hurry. Nothing in Darren's life moved fast. Not his steps, not his thoughts, not even the way he blinked. He reached for the cloth shirt hanging on the doorknob, still wrinkled from yesterday's heat. He folded his bedsheet carefully, pressed it into shape with his palms, and tucked it in the same corner he always did. Then, barefoot, he walked to the sink in the hallway, the kind of sink that hissed before water came out. He brushed his teeth using slow, circular motions, staring not at the mirror, but at the wall beside it. The plaster was cracked there, shaped like a tree branch. He always liked that, a branch on a wall that never grew. By 5:15 a.m., Darren had already brewed his tea. He never used sugar. He believed sweetness should come from life, not spoons. As he sipped in silence, he read the same passage he always did from the book, a torn paperback about an old man who could hear the thoughts of trees. He didn't know why he liked it so much. Maybe because the trees never judged. They just listened. At exactly 5:30 a.m., Darren stepped outside, wearing a faded blue cap and a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. His work began before the city truly woke. He wasn't a collector. He was a rememberer. He didn't pick up trash. He rescued what the world forgot. Bottles without labels, toys without arms, shoes without pairs, frames without photos, chairs with no backs. He walked the alleyways and sidewalks, as if he were walking through a museum of forgotten things. Each object in his hands was not broken, just paused, waiting. That morning, he found a music box without a lid. The ballerina inside was still standing, mid-spin. Darren smiled gently, wrapped her in cloth, and placed her in his bag. "You still dance," he whispered. He moved on. A torn calendar from 1987, a button shaped like a lion's head, a fork with a name etched into the handle. Evelyn. Every item whispered a memory. And Darren never interrupted. He didn't sell these things. He didn't fix them. He arranged them. His small apartment had shelves made from broken drawers. On each shelf, he placed these objects, creating stories in silence. A bottle beside a candle, beside a postcard, beside a marble dot. To most, it looked like clutter. To Darren, it was poetry. Sometimes he would sit and just look at them, not with longing, with peace. Because in a world that kept chasing more, Darren chose to honor what was left. There was a story he remembered from childhood. His grandmother used to say, "Not everything that's cracked is ruined. Some cracks are how the light gets in." He never forgot that, and so every day he walked with purpose, not to clean, not to collect, but to listen, to hold, to remember. That evening, he returned home with only 3 items, but to him, they were enough. A cracked plate with a bluebird on it, a rusted key tied to a red string, a journal with half the pages torn out. He placed the plate on his kitchen window. The light from the sunset hit the bluebird just right. He placed the key on his shelf next to a toy lock he found 2 years ago. He placed the journal under his pillow. Maybe tomorrow he would write in it. Maybe not, but it was there, and that was enough. As night fell, Darren sat in his chair, sipping the same tea, reading the same passage. The tree still listened, and so did he. He wasn't rich, not in coins, but in silence, in memory, and in things no one else noticed. And little did he know, that was the beginning of his fortune, because the world always pays attention. To those who pay attention to the world, the next morning, the rain had softened the streets. Puddles held pieces of sky, and Darren walked with quieter steps, his boots pressing gently into the wet earth. The world felt freshly washed, like someone had wiped away the noise. He liked days like this, when the city whispered instead of shouted. He passed a bench where someone had left a single glove, soaked and forgotten. Darren picked it up with both hands, treating it like something sacred. He imagined who had worn it. Maybe an artist, maybe a mother rushing home, maybe someone who had stopped loving winter. He tucked it in his bag with care. Turning the corner, he saw something he had never seen before. A suitcase, small, brown, with a tag that read, "For whoever needs a new start." He knelt down, heart still, and opened it slowly. Inside were only 3 things: a tiny globe, a photo of a smiling woman holding sunflowers, and a letter that began with the words, "If you found this, it's your turn." He didn't read the rest. Some stories deserve to remain half told. Darren carried the suitcase home like it was gold. When he placed it on the shelf, he didn't touch the items again. They stayed there like a promise he didn't yet understand. That night, while making tea, the power went out. The apartment fell into deep shadow, but Darren didn't panic. He walked to his shelf and picked up a small candle, the one with wax that never seemed to end. He lit it with a match, and the flame danced gently. He sat by the window and looked outside. In the building across from his, there was a woman wrapping gifts. Her face was tired, but her hands were careful. Below her window, a boy tried to catch raindrops in a bucket. Darren smiled. The world was still alive, still strange, still full of stories. And then he remembered the broken radio he found 3 weeks ago. He had kept it not for the sound, but for the way it looked when the dial moved. He brought it to the table, placed the candle next to it, and slowly turned the dial. nothing but static. But to him, it sounded like the sea. He closed his eyes and imagined himself on a boat made of bottle caps, sailing through an ocean of forgotten dreams. He dreamed that night of strange things, of spoons that whispered, recipes, of socks that led people home, of doors that opened just by being believed in. And when he woke, he felt something shift, as if the world had moved a little closer to him. That morning, he found an envelope under his door. No name, just a drawing of a candle. Inside was a note. You reminded me that I matter. Thank you. He didn't know who sent it, but he folded it neatly and placed it in the journal beneath his pillow. He began noticing more people on his walks. Noticing him, a girl with green headphones waved. A man at the bakery handed him 2 pastries instead of 1. Even the pigeons seemed to follow his path a little longer than before. It wasn't fame, it wasn't fortune, it was something else. Recognition, the kind you get when your soul hums in rhythm with the world. And slowly, without realizing it, people started leaving things for him. Not trash tokens. A painting of a tree made from tea stains. A box of broken keys. A book with a title scratched out and a note inside. This made me cry. Maybe it'll make you feel something too. He added each piece to his collection, not to display, but to remember, to honor, to say, this mattered to someone once. And in doing that, he found himself becoming lighter, not in body, but in heart, as if the weight of being invisible was slowly lifting. One afternoon, while sitting by the candle, he whispered, I never needed to be seen. I just needed to see. And somehow, the flame flickered like it agreed. He didn't know it yet, but the small museum of forgotten things in his room was about to become something more. Not because he wanted it, but because the world needed a reminder that value isn't in shine or price or perfection. Value is in the story, in the care, in the memory. And Darren, quiet, patient, ordinary Darren, was becoming the richest man on his street. Not in dollars, but in meaning. And that kind of wealth always finds a way to grow. The 3rd winter since Darren's journey began was colder than most. Frost kissed the windows each morning, and his breath made clouds inside the apartment. He didn't mind. He wore a 2nd sweater under his coat and wrapped a scarf someone had left on his doorknob, mustard yellow, with tiny embroidered stars. He never knew who gave it, but every time he put it on, he felt like he was being watched over by someone kind. That morning, the city had turned silver. The sun reflected off the ice in patterns like broken glass mosaics. Darren walked slower than usual. Each footstep on the frozen ground made a crisp sound, like the world was quietly applauding his movement. He turned down a small alley he hadn't noticed before. There, behind a pile of snow-covered cardboard, was a painting. No frame, just canvas of a hand holding a flower made entirely of light. He stood still. Something about it felt like a memory he had never lived. He rolled it carefully and tucked it beneath his arm. Later that day, he set the painting on the floor of his small room and stared at it for hours, not trying to understand it, just letting it be. As he watched, he imagined stories. Maybe it had belonged to someone who painted in the dark, guided only by emotion. Maybe it had been discarded after a heartbreak. Maybe it had never been wanted in the first place, until now. He boiled water in his dented kettle and made mint tea from dried leaves a neighbor had gifted him. The steam rose in slow spirals. He sipped in silence, the painting resting against the wall. He whispered, "You're safe now," and the room felt warmer. That night, he dreamed of his younger self, the boy who used to draw faces on napkins in diners, who believed trees had names, who cried when a book ended because it meant saying goodbye. In the dream, the boy handed Darren a cardboard box and said, "It's time." When Darren opened it, there was nothing inside, just a mirror. But instead of his reflection, he saw every item he'd ever saved. The glove, the candle, the suitcase, the broken watch, all glowing softly like fireflies. When he woke, he knew it was time to open his door wider. The very next morning, he wrote a small note in pencil and taped it to the outside of his door. If you've lost something or need to remember what matters, you can knock. He didn't expect anything, but that same evening, there was a knock. A woman stood there with tears in her eyes. She held a box. "I don't want to throw these away," she said, "but I can't keep them either." Darren took the box and invited her to sit. She didn't talk much. She just looked around his room at the shelves, the suitcase, the painting, and nodded when she left. She said, "I feel a little less heavy now." Inside her box were birthday cards from someone who no longer wrote, a music box that no longer played, a dried bouquet, a train ticket from 1999. Darren didn't organize them. He didn't analyze them. He just made space, and from that night on, the knocks came more often. A man who brought a rusted compass, a teenager with an unfinished song, a child holding a shoe that didn't fit anymore. They came not to give trash, but to release memories, to offer what they couldn't carry. And Darren, without judgment or questions, received each one with quiet reverence. He began writing small tags, "Left with love," belonged to someone brave, still beautiful, even broken. He tied them gently with string and placed the items around the room. It was no longer just a collection. It was becoming a garden, not of plants, but of stories that needed to breathe. One evening, the sky turned indigo and the stars blinked one by one. Darren lit his candle and whispered, "I think I'm building something I can't name." And the flame danced, as if to say, "You don't need to." That night, he placed a blank notebook near the door with a pencil. On the cover, he wrote, "Leave a thought, if you wish, something you once believed." In the morning, there were already 3 messages. 1. I believed I was too late. 2. I believed I needed to be perfect. 3. I believed no one saw me. Darren read them and cried softly. Not out of sadness, but because he knew those voices. He had once spoken each of those thoughts to himself. He picked up his own pencil and added, "I now believe forgotten things still hold value." He didn't know who would read it, but he hoped someone would. The museum, though never named as such, began to attract attention. Not through signs, not through photos, but through whispers. People who had lost things told others. People who needed quiet told others. People who longed to remember who they once were came. But Darren never charged. He never turned anyone away. He simply opened the door and made tea. And that's how, without plan or promotion, Darren, the man who picked up trash, began building a quiet fortune. Not in coins, not in followers, but in healed hearts, in shared silence, in the invisible wealth of things, once thought worthless, and every time someone knocked, he whispered before opening the door, "Welcome back." The calendar turned quietly. No celebrations, no confetti. Just another morning of pale light coming through the frosted window panes. Darren opened his eyes to the familiar hum of the radiator and the soft rustle of paper from the notebook near his door. He hadn't read the newest entries yet, but he could feel their weight. Some people didn't sign their names. Some wrote in fragments. But every word left behind carried echoes of something that once mattered deeply. He moved through his morning, slowly, as always, warm water on his face, a clean shirt ironed by hand. He still used the same old iron from the second-hand store. The kettle sang. The scent of toasted oats filled the room. His movements were simple rituals, stitched into the fabric of his peace. That day, as he stepped outside, a child stood across the street. The boy was no older than 10 and clutched a worn-out stuffed dog under his arm. Their eyes met. Darren nodded softly. The boy hesitated, then crossed. "Are you the man who collects forgotten things?" he asked, voice small but steady. "I am," Darren said, kneeling to meet his gaze. "My mom says it's just junk, but I think they still matter." Darren smiled. "Then they do." The boy handed him the stuffed animal. "His name is Lucky, but I don't feel lucky anymore." Darren placed Lucky gently in his satchel, next to a tiny glass bird. Someone had given him the day before. "Maybe we just forgot what luck looks like," he said. The boy didn't say goodbye. He just turned and walked away, shoulders lighter. That afternoon, Darren set Lucky in a chair by the window, facing the sun. He wrote a tag, "Brought comfort, will again." And then he sat beside him and watched the light move slowly across the floor. Around sunset, a woman knocked. Her eyes looked like storm clouds, heavy and full of something she couldn't say. Yet, in her hands, she carried a chipped coffee mug and a folded piece of music paper. "This was his," she said. "He used to hum the same tune every morning. I hated it then. Now, I would give anything to hear it again." Darren said nothing. He only opened his palm. The woman placed the mug and the sheet music there, as though offering them to something sacred, and in a way, she was. "Would you like tea?" Darren asked. She nodded. They sat in silence as the water boiled. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just looked around at the suitcase, the compass, the glass bird, Lucky, and exhaled. Before she left, she wrote in the notebook, "I used to believe grief made me weak. Now I know it just means I loved deeply." Each entry was a seed, and Darren began to see what he was really growing. That night, as he lay in bed, the wind whispered through the cracked window pane. Not cold, not harsh, just a soft reminder that the world was always speaking if you listened slowly enough. In his dream, he stood in a vast room filled with shelves of items, not just the ones he had collected, but thousands more. Some shimmered faintly, others pulsed like quiet heartbeats. A voice, not loud, but certain, said, "These are not broken. They are waiting." When he woke, he lit the candle and whispered, "So am I." Over time, people stopped calling him by name. They called him the keeper, the one who held space for what others couldn't carry. Some left letters, some brought objects, some came with nothing but silence and left with something unspoken, now slightly lighter. A boy once brought a plastic whistle. "I don't know why, but I think it wants to sing again," he said. Darren placed it gently beside a music box, and when the candlelight hit it just right, it cast rainbows on the wall. That same week, someone brought an old cookbook, pages stained with time. Darren cooked from it that night, a simple soup. As he stirred, he whispered, "Abundance is remembering how little we need to feel full." And he felt full. One evening, a letter arrived. No return address. Just these words inside. "I thought I was alone in seeing value where others saw waste. Thank you for reminding me I'm not broken, just built differently." He placed it on the wall. The museum, if it could be called that, now glowed at night. From the outside, it looked like a small room with too many things. But those who entered knew it was not clutter. It was memory, permission, hope, and Darren. He began to feel wealthy, not because of money. He had little, not because of praise. He never asked for it, but because every day he was entrusted with someone's invisible truth. And truth, he learned, is the most valuable thing we forget to carry. Winter approached slowly, not with storms, but with silence. The kind of silence that wraps around rooftops and windows, pressing gently against the world. Darren's coat had a new patch, now not because it tore, but because someone had sewn a piece of their grandmother's blanket into it. "So you carry comfort with you," they said. The town had changed in small, almost invisible ways. People spoke more softly when passing his door. Strangers began leaving things quietly by the step. Not garbage, but memories they no longer knew how to hold. One morning, Darren found a silver key with no note, no context. He placed it on the wall with a sign beneath it. Sometimes we're given answers before we know the questions. He no longer kept track of what was given. He never asked why. He only received. One woman came every week with nothing but her presence. She sat, she breathed, and one day she whispered, "I haven't spoken to anyone in 6 years." Darren handed her a wooden spoon. It belonged to someone who also forgot how to speak until they sang, he said. She smiled. Just a little. Darren's space was no longer just a room. It became a sanctuary, a place where nothing was for sale, yet everyone left feeling richer one night. Under the glow of his desk lamp, Darren began to sort the small objects on his table. A marble with a crack, a watch that no longer ticked, a feather dipped in ink. He aligned them carefully, gently. He whispered to each one, "You are not forgotten. You are not broken. You are part of the story." And as he did, he realized something simple, something powerful. He wasn't collecting trash. He was restoring belief. Belief that a thing once loved could still carry love. Belief that a person once discarded could still carry light. Belief that value is never lost, only misplaced. One day, a young girl entered, holding nothing but a piece of string. "It tied my brother's kite. He's not here anymore. But I want the string to go somewhere." Darren tied the string to the window latch, and when the wind came, it danced. That evening, he wrote, "Wealth is knowing you have something to give, even when your hands are empty." People came and went. They brought old chess pieces, broken glasses, ticket stubs from forgotten films. Each item became a star in Darren's constellation of quiet abundance. His neighbors, once skeptical, began to see the glow that came from his window, not as strange, but sacred. Even children began drawing their own lost objects on paper and taping them to the walls. This was my invisible friend. This was my courage. This was my voice. And Darren, always listening, simply nodded. Years passed. The room grew full, but never cluttered. The notebook filled with stories. The objects whispered their memories to one another. And Darren, older now, slower, still woke each morning, still ironed his shirts, still placed one hand gently on the table before the day began. He never sought recognition. But one evening, a man from a distant city knocked. He had heard whispers. He asked if he could buy something. Darren smiled. "There is nothing here for sale," he said. "But if you leave something behind, you may just find what you're looking for." The man left a fountain pen that no longer worked. He walked away, a little lighter. That night, Darren held the pen, whispered to it, and placed it beside the old compass. He understood now. His fortune was not measured in coins or accounts, but in the depth of connection, in the courage of others to share what they thought had no worth. He had become wealthy beyond calculation. and as he sat at the window, a candle flickering beside him, he whispered one final truth to the night air. I collected what the world forgot, and found what it had been missing all along. And in that silence, full of invisible music and golden shadows, Darren rested, not because his work was done, but because he had finally remembered his own value. The sun was still low when Darren opened the creaky shutters of the storage room. Dust floated like soft snowflakes in the golden morning light. 4 months now, this room had become more than a place to store found objects. It had become a chamber of possibilities, a silent witness to the man he was becoming. On that morning, something strange happened. A small, round mirror he'd once found beside a broken dresser began to reflect light in a way it hadn't before. Not just any light. It seemed warmer, more alive. Darren stood before it and whispered, as he often did when no one was around, "What am I still afraid to see in myself?" He remembered a dream from the night before. In it, a child version of himself was trying to build a castle out of cardboard boxes while adults walked past and laughed. That image stayed with him, like a prayer. Keep building, even if no one sees, he muttered. He walked through the garden, where broken pots had turned into mosaics, and tin cans held vibrant red and yellow flowers. Each one had been discarded by someone, and yet, here, they bloomed. He knelt and whispered to the soil, "There is no such thing as waste, only waiting." Inside the workshop, Darren began working on a new piece. It wasn't for sale. It was a sculpture, a tall man made of broom handles, spoons, rusted bolts, and shards of mirror. He named it the Believer. Every time he placed a piece, he whispered in intention, "Let someone see the value in themselves today. Let forgotten parts become beautiful again. Let abundance grow quietly." A woman passed by outside and paused. "Is that art?" she asked, peeking in. Darren smiled. "It's memory, dressed as metal." The woman walked in and asked if she could look closer. She was a local school counselor and said she worked with children who had trouble expressing themselves. Ren offered her a seat and tea, and soon they were talking about dreams, not the kind you have while sleeping, but the kind that wake you up. Her name was Camille. She had kind eyes and a quiet voice. She told him about a student who used to draw machines from scraps in his notebooks. "He reminds me of you," she said, "except you didn't stop." That night, Darren added a new affirmation to his evening candle ritual. "Every step I take opens doors for others, too." Days turned into weeks, and Camille returned often. She brought children who struggled with speech or sadness, and Darren began letting them play with his materials. Old wires became animals. Bottle caps turned into stars. One girl, who hadn't spoken in months, created a tiny house out of cardboard and whispered, "This is my safe place." Darren didn't try to fix anyone. He simply gave them forgotten things and permission. Camille, seeing the transformation, helped Darren register the space as a nonprofit workshop. It wasn't a business in the traditional sense, but donations started coming. People gave what they could: money, time, and more forgotten objects. Darren's reputation grew not because he advertised, but because people left lighter after visiting. They came to throw things away and left feeling seen one evening. After, All the children had gone home. Camille sat beside Darren on the steps. "You built a fortune," she said softly. He smiled. "Out of trash?" "No," she replied. "Out of things that mattered, but no one noticed." The moon rose gently behind them, casting silver light across the garden of reclaimed hope. Darren looked at the stars and whispered his final affirmation for the day. What the world throws away might be the beginning of something holy. The letter that was never sent it was a quiet afternoon when Darren opened an old suitcase he hadn't touched in years. Inside, wrapped in a faded scarf, was a yellowed envelope addressed to someone who no longer existed, his younger self. He had written it on the worst day of his life, a day when he almost gave up. He didn't remember the exact words, but as he unfolded the paper, tears filled his eyes. The letter said, "I don't know if we're ever going to make it, but if you're reading this, maybe we did. Maybe there's still something in you, worth keeping. Please, don't throw yourself away." He folded it gently and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." That day, he walked down the street he hadn't visited in years. The place where he used to collect trash from broken sidewalks now held artisan cafes and polished glass storefronts. He didn't resent the change. He simply walked with his hands behind his back, nodding to the rhythm of his steps. He stopped in front of a boy sketching on the curb. The boy was drawing machines, not perfect ones, but hopeful ones. Darren knelt down and handed him a gear he'd kept in his pocket since morning. "For your invention," he said. The boy smiled like he'd been handed treasure. In the weeks that followed, Darren began writing short stories, each one inspired by an object he had once rescued. A cracked teacup became a tale of a grandmother who saved a village with her. Silence. A torn backpack turned into the story of a boy who carried stars instead of books. He placed the stories inside bottles and left them in different corners of the city, under benches, beside lampposts, even tucked into tree hollows. Some people called it magic. Others just smiled and said, "That man knows something." But Darren never claimed to know. He only knew how to listen to the objects, to the wind, to the forgotten. One evening, Camille found a bottle with one of Darren's stories. She read it aloud to her students. They sat in a circle, holding pieces of junk that suddenly felt important. She asked, "What part of this story reminded you of yourself?" And a boy answered, "The part where the broken toy still had a heart." That night, Darren sat alone in his garden and whispered, "I am still planting." Even in silence. Years passed. The workshop became a sanctuary, not just for objects, but for people. Those who had lost their sense of purpose. Those who thought they had nothing to offer. Those who didn't know their value. And slowly, the city changed, not with noise or announcements, but through the ripple of one man picking up what others left behind. Darren never became rich in the way magazines wrote about. But one morning, a university professor visited him, asking to document his work. "You've created a living philosophy," she said. "Can we call it reclamation mindset?" Darren smiled. "Call it whatever you like. I just believe that nothing and no one is ever truly useless." He was invited to speak, but he always declined. Instead, he sent students back with a box of scraps and a question. What can you create with this that the world never expected? At the edge of his property, he built a gate from old door frames. On each plank, a phrase was carved. You are not broken. You are becoming. You were never trash, only buried. The forgotten still carry gold. Visitors would walk through it in silence, often weeping, not because it was sad, but because something inside them finally felt seen in the final days of his life. Darren spent time with Camille in the garden. They sat beneath a tree grown from a pot he had, once found in a landfill. The branches were filled with wind chimes made from cutlery and bicycle chains. As the wind sang its quiet song, Darren turned to Camille and said, "I didn't build a fortune with money." "No," she replied, holding his hand. "You built it with faith, in the small, in the unseen." And so, the man who once picked up trash left behind something greater than riches. He left behind a trail of recognition, proof that within every discarded thing lies a story waiting to bloom. The last line he ever wrote, tucked in the pages of an old book, simply said, "May whoever finds this remember, you are not what they threw away. You are what you choose to become." The letter that arrived too early. She never expected anything to arrive that day. It was the kind of day where the minutes blurred into each other, like soft clouds that forget where they begin. She had been folding laundry in silence, her thoughts tangled in the weight of everything unfinished. When the knock came, it didn't sound urgent. It was gentle, like someone remembering an old song. She opened the door to find no one there. Only a single envelope on the doorstep. No return address, just her name, written in careful cursive, as if by someone who knew her well but hadn't spoken in years. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. It was too light to be important, too old-looking to be recent. She closed the door and sat down slowly. The house creaked around her, like it too was holding its breath. She opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, neatly folded and perfectly preserved. The ink wasn't smudged, but faded slightly at the edges, like time had touched it kindly. The first line read, "This letter is from your future, but not the future you think." She blinked, not because she didn't understand, but because something in her chest stirred. A memory, maybe, a voice she hadn't heard in years. The letter continued, "I'm writing this before it's too late, because one day you'll forget who you were, and I don't want that to happen." The words felt like a mirror. Not the kind that shows your face, but the kind that shows the parts you buried under layers of responsibility, fear, and noise. The letter listed things she hadn't thought about in years. You used to love red flowers. You once wanted to live by the sea. You believed in magic, remember? She paused, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. Then came the line that undid her. "It's not too late. You can still remember. You can still choose." She stood up and walked down the hallway. For a moment, the mirror on the wall didn't reflect her face. It reflected her younger self, eyes wide, dreaming, unapologetically alive. She stepped. Outside, the garden in the backyard hadn't been touched in years. She knelt on the earth and planted one seed. Just one. Not out of duty, but out of memory. That night, she folded the letter gently. This time, man placed it inside a wooden box. She didn't know who sent it. Maybe no one. Maybe it had always been there, waiting for her to be ready. The next morning, she smiled, for the first time in weeks. Not because everything had changed, but because she had. The alarm buzzed gently at 6:02 a.m., echoing softly in the dim light of a small studio apartment tucked behind an old bakery in Savannah, Georgia. The walls were pale yellow, kissed by early sunbeams that slipped between wooden shutters. Elijah blinked twice before reaching over to silence the alarm. His fingers brushed against a glass of water he had placed there the night before, part of his quiet rituals. He sat up slowly, letting his feet rest on the cool wooden floor for a moment before rising. The smell of warm bread drifted in through the window. Elijah lived simply, but there was a quiet intentionality in everything he did. He walked to the bathroom and turned on the tap. The water gurgled slightly before flowing clear. He picked up his soft bristled toothbrush and a tiny glass cup of baking soda and mint, a recipe passed from his grandmother. Brushing slowly, he looked in the mirror. There were fine lines beneath his eyes, the kind drawn by thinking too much and dreaming too quietly. But this morning, like every morning, he whispered the same phrase before rinsing his mouth. There is wealth growing beneath the surface. I just have to keep planting. Elijah pressed a shirt with care, a deep olive green linen that had grown softer with every wash. He ironed slowly, folding the collar down as steam hissed into the silence. He dressed with calm movements, tucking the shirt in with a precise gesture, as if it mattered. Creaking bicycles, sleepy dogs, and shopkeepers pulling open metal shutters. Elijah took his canvas satchel, which contained a journal, a small tin of coins, and a worn paperback titled The Language of Seeds. He never left without them as he stepped outside. He passed a neighbor, a woman in her 80s, who nodded without words. Elijah smiled, tipped his head gently, and walked toward the community garden on the edge of the historic district. The path was lined with mossy bricks and overhanging oaks. He reached a small plot of dirt he had been caring for over the past 7 months. But this wasn't a garden of flowers or vegetables. It was where Elijah planted coins. Yes, coins. Every morning. Before work, Elijah would dig a tiny hole, whisper something only he could hear, and press a coin into the earth. Quarters, nickels, even a penny or two. The soil knew them all. Some passersby laughed at him. Others simply avoided eye contact. But Elijah kept planting in his journal. He recorded each day's planting. Page after page of day 142, planted 1 dime. Whispered, I trust in invisible returns. This ritual wasn't about money. At least, not the way most people thought about it. For Elijah, it was a commitment to unseen growth, a belief that value didn't always scream loudly. Sometimes it whispered through roots. One morning, a boy named Miles wandered by and asked, "Why are you putting money in the dirt?" Elijah smiled, "Because not all investments need a bank." Miles blinked, "But it won't grow." Elijah leaned closer, eyes twinkling. "Not all growth can be seen right away." Elijah continued his ritual every morning without fail. Or son, with clean hands or calloused ones, he knelt before the earth with the gentleness of someone handling memory. His hands, though large and rough, moved the dirt as if tucking in a child. Each coin was buried with intention, pressed just below the surface, always with a whispered phrase, "What I bury in faith, I will harvest in peace." No one asked him about it again. The world around him moved too fast to stop for a man who planted coins. But something strange had begun happening, not to the soil, but within Elijah himself. He started to breathe differently, deeper, more deliberately. He began making his tea without checking his phone, and some mornings, when he passed by his reflection in the window, he caught himself smiling. That week, he planted a coin that had a small dent in it. It reminded him of something. Mini story. The cracked teacup years ago. Elijah had inherited a porcelain teacup from his grandfather. One day, it slipped from his fingers and cracked. He wanted to throw it away, but his grandfather said, "Don't. That crack, that's proof it's been trusted." He kept the cup, and to this day, it was the one he used every morning. Not despite the crack, but because of it. One morning, as he planted his coin, he noticed something. A faint green sprout, tiny, fragile, but unmistakable. He stared at it, heart pounding like a drum in a quiet cathedral. He didn't touch it, didn't speak, just closed his eyes and whispered, "Something is listening." He walked home slower that day. Along the path, he noticed more things than usual. The rustle of the trees, a chalk drawing on the sidewalk that read, "Believe here." Even the clouds seemed like they were waiting for someone to look up. That night, instead of reading his usual book, Elijah opened a new notebook and wrote, "Day 149, the first sprout." No one saw it, but I did. Maybe belief is a kind of sunlight. Every morning after, Elijah added one new phrase to his whispers. Even if it takes time. Even if no one sees, I am growing. And with that, the story continued. The next few days brought more than just sprouts. Tiny green shoots began peeking through patches of soil Elijah had once believed were too dry, too hardened by the past. Each morning, more signs appeared, subtle but certain. A leaf curled like a coin. A stem stood tall like a spine dot. Elijah began watering the soil now. Not just with a small tin can, but with presence. He knelt longer, whispered softer. He noticed how the sun hit the patch at exactly 7:32 a.m. and how birds always landed nearby when he spoke. Still, he never expected others to understand. Until one morning, when he arrived and found someone already there. It was Miles, the same boy who once questioned the planting. But this time, he wasn't laughing. He was kneeling. In his hand, a penny. In his eyes, curiosity wrapped in belief. "Do I have to say something too?" The boy asked. Elijah nodded gently. "It doesn't have to be fancy, just honest." Miles stared at the coin for a moment, then whispered, "I want my mom to smile again," and buried the penny. Neither of them spoke for a long time after that. That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. He sat at his window, sipping chamomile tea from the cracked porcelain cup, watching the street lamps flicker. Aching at once, he opened his journal and wrote, "Day 155. A boy believed." Maybe belief is contagious. Elijah remembered something his mother once told him. A gardener plants things they'll never see bloom, just because the soil asked for it. He had been 12. He didn't understand it then. He did now. A few mornings later, Elijah found a paper note buried beside one of his coins. It said, "Thank you for not giving up. Someone watching." He folded it slowly, placed it in his satchel, and walked home a different man. From that day on, Elijah began adding a new phrase to his ritual. "What I give to the earth returns." Through the hearts I never knew I touched. He smiled as he ironed his olive shirt. He let the steam fill the air like incense. The mirror caught his reflection. It didn't feel like a stranger. One morning, gray clouds blanketed Savannah. Rain began to fall, soft and steady. Elijah still went to the garden, his shoes soaked as he stepped across puddles, his shirt sticking to his back. But he didn't mind. Rain was just the sky's way of reminding things to grow. When he arrived, he found something unusual. The garden was full, not with vegetables, not with flowers, but with coins, dozens, maybe hundreds, shining, wet, pressed into the soil, scattered as if the earth had returned every offering he'd made. But Elijah knew it wasn't magic. These were other people's coins. People had started planting with him. There were no signs, no announcements, just quiet participation. A silent revolution of belief. Children, mothers, janitors, teachers, all adding to the garden. Coins with notes attached. Messages like, "For the dream, I stopped chasing. For the bakery, I want to open. For the day, I believe I'm enough." Elijah stood in the rain, tears mixing with the drops on his face. He placed one more coin in the earth and whispered, "May every hidden hope rise, even if it starts in the mud. Later that day, while walking home, he passed a woman with a bright red umbrella. She paused, looked at him, and said, "I used to think nothing I did mattered. Then someone told me about the man who plants coins." She smiled and kept walking. Elijah didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was full of light. That night, he wrote, "Day 162. The garden grew without me. Maybe I was never planting coins. Maybe I was planting permission." He folded his journal closed, turned off the light, and sat quietly for a while, listening to the rain. By the end of that year, the garden was no longer Elijah's alone. It had become something larger. People began arriving before sunrise. Some brought seeds, others coins. A few brought only stories, but those were enough. Because in this place, stories grew to dot the city tried to put up a sign. Elijah's garden, it read, but he took it down. "It doesn't belong to me," he said softly. "It belongs to anyone who ever doubted they had something worth growing." He added, no fences, no instructions, just kept planting, one quiet act of belief at a time. A small boy once came to the garden dragging a broken toy car. He dug a hole and buried it. Elijah asked why. "Because my dad said we're too poor for dreams." The boy whispered. Elijah knelt beside him, pressed a coin into the soil, and said, "Then let's plant one together." Elijah's house remained small. His shoes still had holes, but his soul, it had grown past the sky. He still woke up at 5, still brushed his teeth slowly, still ironed his shirt with care. Marina's journey of transformation. Marina woke up once again at 5 in the morning, not because of the alarm, but because of the familiar sound of bills piling up in her mind. At 32 years old, a single mother to Sophia, 8, and Gabriel, 5, she carried the weight of being solely responsible for her family's livelihood. Her salary as an administrative assistant barely covered rent, and with each passing month, the feeling of drowning grew stronger. Sitting in the small kitchen of a rented apartment, Marina stared at the bills scattered across the table. "There's no way out," she thought, repeating the same phrase that had echoed in her mind for months. It was as if an inner voice constantly whispered, "A woman alone with kids can't succeed. You were born to struggle, not to win." But that Tuesday morning, something different happened. Sophia approached her, still in her pajamas, and asked, "Mommy, why do you always look sad when you look at those papers?" The innocence of the question cut through the layers of resignation Marina had built around herself. "I wasn't born to live like this," Marina murmured, surprised by her own words. It was the first time in years she questioned her situation differently. "I deserve abundance and prosperity in my life," she said again, this time with more conviction, as if awakening from a long sleep. In the days that followed, Marina began observing her inner dialogue. She realized that her words were seeds. she planted daily in her mind. I don't have money. I can't. It's impossible. She decided it was time to plant different seeds. I am capable of creating wealth, she began repeating every morning. Opportunities constantly come to me. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but Marina started noticing small changes. A coworker mentioned a free online digital marketing course. Before, she would have thought, I don't have time for that. Now, a new inner voice said, I make time for what helps me grow. Marina enrolled in the course and discovered a world she had never known. She learned about social media, online sales, content creation. More importantly, she discovered talents she had never valued. I have valuable skills the world needs, she repeated while practicing the course exercises. With each new lesson, Marina felt her mindset expanding. Abundance is my natural right, she affirmed as she created her first social media page. She decided to start offering organization and planning services, something she had always done naturally, but never considered as a source of income. Her first client came through a neighbor's referral. Marina charged a low fee, still carrying the belief that I can't ask for too much. But the result was so good that the client recommended her to 3 friends. My work brings real value to people's lives, Marina began affirming proudly. Little by little, Marina raised her prices. Whenever the old voice whispered, You're charging too much, she consciously replied, I deserve to be well paid for my work. My worth is not limited by external circumstances. Months passed, and Marina developed a complete system for home organization and family financial planning. She created her own method, which she called Home Harmony, combining physical organization with financial structure. I am an innovative entrepreneur, she would say to herself. Savoring each word, Gabriel and Sophia began to notice changes at home, not just financial ones, but in their mother's energy. Mommy, you're happier now, Sophia observed. During dinner, Marina smiled, realizing that her inner transformation was reflecting throughout the family. I created this reality through my thoughts and actions. Marina reflected as she calculated her monthly income. In 6 months, she had tripled her earnings. More importantly, she had completely changed her relationship with money and with her. Possibilities, Marina started documenting her journey on social media, sharing not just organization tips, but also her personal transformation. I inspire others to change their lives became one of her favorite affirmations. Her growth accelerated. Marina received invitations to give talks, created an online course about her method, and developed a consulting service for women who wanted to reorganize their financial lives. I have valuable knowledge to share, she would repeat before each presentation. 1 year after the beginning of her journey, Marina moved into a bigger house, not just because she could afford it, but because she finally believed she deserved it. I deserve to live with abundance and comfort, she declared while choosing the decor for her new home. Sophia and Gabriel had their own rooms, a garden to play in, and more importantly, a mother who radiated confidence and possibility. Mommy, you're amazing, Gabriel said, hugging her legs. Marina realized she had become the example she wanted to be for her children. I am proof that it's possible to completely transform your life, Marina wrote in her journal that night. Her company now had 5 employees, all women she mentored. Not just professionally, but personally. Marina created a free mentorship program for single mothers, giving back to the community what she had received from the universe. The more I give, the more I receive. She discovered was a natural law that worked perfectly in her life. 2 years after that transformative Tuesday morning, Marina was speaking at a women's entrepreneurship event. She looked out at an audience of 500 women and said, "You are not born to survive. We're born to thrive. Each one of you has everything inside you to create the life you desire." After the talk, a young mother approached her with tears in her eyes. I was ready to give up. "Your words made me believe it's possible." Marina smiled, remembering herself 2 years earlier. Not only is it possible, inevitable when you choose to change from the inside out. Marina understood that her true wealth wasn't just in her bank account, but in her ability to reinvent herself, believe in herself, and inspire other women to do the same. "I am abundance in action," she repeated every morning, knowing each word was a seed planted not only in her own mind, but in the minds of everyone who heard her today. Marina is the CEO of a consulting firm that earned over 1 million reais last year. But when asked about her greatest success, she points to Sophia and Gabriel, who grew up seeing that limits exist only in our minds, then that a determined woman can create any reality she chooses. "I transformed my life, and my life transformed others," Marina reflects as she plans her next project, a foundation to empower single mothers across the country. My story of prosperity is just the beginning of a wave of transformation that will touch thousands of lives. The journey that began with an innocent question from a child became a personal revolution that proves it doesn't matter where you come from or what your current circumstances are. What matters is the decision to plant new seeds in your mind and water them with consistent action. Marina learned that prosperity isn't a destination, but a state of mind that manifests in tangible results when nurtured with faith, persistence, and an unshakable belief in our infinite possibilities. I deserve all the abundance the universe has to offer, and I receive it with gratitude and joy. The letter that arrived too early. She never expected anything to arrive that day. It was the kind of day where the minutes blurred into each other, like soft clouds that forget where they begin. She had been folding laundry in silence, her thoughts tangled in the weight of everything unfinished. When the knock came, it didn't sound urgent. It was gentle, like someone remembering an old song. She opened the door to find no one there, only a single envelope on the doorstep. No return address, just her name, written in careful cursive, as if by someone who knew her well but hadn't spoken in years. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. It was like too light to be important, too old-looking to be recent. She closed the door and sat down slowly. The house creaked around her like it too was holding its breath. She opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, neatly folded and perfectly preserved. The ink wasn't smudged, but faded slightly at the edges, like time had touched it kindly. The first line read, "This letter is from your future, but not the future you think." She blinked, not because she didn't understand, but because something in her chest stirred. A memory, maybe, a voice she hadn't heard in years. The letter continued, "I'm writing this before it's too late, because one day you'll forget who you were, and I don't want that to happen." The words felt like a mirror, not the kind that shows your face, but the kind that shows the parts you buried under layers of responsibility, fear, and noise. The letter listed things she hadn't thought about in years. You used to love red flowers. You once wanted to live by the sea. You believed in magic, remember? She paused, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. Then came the line that undid her. It's not too late. You can still remember. You can still choose. She stood up and walked down the hallway. For a moment, the mirror on the wall didn't reflect her face. It reflected her younger self, eyes wide, dreaming, unapologetically alive. She stepped. Outside, the garden in the backyard hadn't been touched in years. She knelt on the earth and planted one seed. Just one. Not out of duty, but out of memory. That night, she folded the letter gently. This time, man placed it inside a wooden box. She didn't know who sent it. Maybe no one. Maybe it had always been there, waiting for her to be ready. The next morning, she smiled. For the first time in weeks. Not because everything had changed, but because she had. She was always the quiet one, while the other children ran barefoot through the fields, chasing kites or laughter. She sat beside her grandmother's porch with an old shoebox and a pair of dull scissors. Inside that box, she saw something no one else could. Not cardboard, not glue, not scraps. A house. House. Every Saturday, she would dig through the recycling pile, collecting bits of string, pieces of fabric, buttons, bottle caps, and anything that felt like it belonged in a home. One time, her uncle asked, "Why do you spend so much time on trash?" She looked up and replied, "Because it's not trash once it becomes something I can live in." He laughed, but she didn't. She smoothed out a scrap of newspaper like it was velvet and folded it gently into what would become a tiny armchair. Her grandmother, who watched her without interrupting, began saving her old sewing ribbons and tea box lids, leaving them near the girl's corner like silent offerings. The girl never explained what each house meant, but each one had a bedroom, a kitchen, a garden, and a window. Always a window. "Why the window?" her grandmother once asked. "Because I need to see where I'm going," the girl said, without lifting her eyes. At night, she would line the boxes on the floor beside her mattress. Some were painted, some bare, but each one carried a piece of her longing. Not the kind of longing that aches, but the kind that knows it's only waiting. She didn't know the word manifestation. She only knew how to make space. She believed that if she built enough homes in small scale, one would eventually appear in full. "I'm just practicing," she whispered once to a moth that landed on the edge of her box. "I'll be ready when the real one comes." Her mother, tired from long shifts and too many bills, once stepped on one of the boxes by accident. It collapsed beneath her heel. The girl said nothing, but that night she made a new one. And this time she added a sign above the door. "Welcome back." There was no bitterness in her, only continuity. Quiet persistence that didn't ask for applause. Her classmates teased her once, calling her the girl with cardboard dreams. She smiled. Better than having none. One day, while helping her grandmother sweep the front yard, a man passed by carrying blueprints. He dropped one. The girl picked it up and stared. It was almost identical to her latest shoebox house. Same porch, same slanted roof, same garden path. The man turned around, surprised. "You like houses?" he asked. She simply nodded. He looked at her for a moment and said, "You've got the eyes of someone who's already lived in 1,000 of them." She didn't understand then, but that night She made her biggest house yet, and instead of a roof, she left it open. Because now, she believed the sky had started watching. The next morning, something strange happened. Her grandmother, who rarely left the house, called her outside. "Look," she said, pointing to a small wooden crate near the fence. Inside it were scraps of fine fabric, tiny decorative beads, and a roll of golden thread. No note, no explanation, just beauty, as if the universe had dropped off a gift tailored to her dreams. The girl smiled and whispered, "Thank you, not to anyone visible, but to the wind itself." That day, she used the golden thread to stitch curtains into her shoebox windows. For the first time, the rooms didn't just look like homes. They felt like them, soft, ready, alive. A few days later, a classmate who had once teased her approached with a shy look. "Can you make one for me?" he asked. "A house." She looked surprised. "Why?" He shrugged. "I just want something that feels like mine." She nodded. "But you have to choose the rooms. I only build what people believe in." He thought for a moment and said, "I want a tree in the middle of the living room." She didn't ask why. She simply began building. Word spread. Soon, other children were quietly handing her bottle caps and velvet scraps, saying things like, "This is for the music room," or "My house needs a secret door." She never said no. She only smiled and built. Every house was different. Every one of them had a window. And slowly, the laughter changed. No more mocking. Now they came to her with awe. Not because her boxers were perfect, but because they felt like something deeper, like prayers with walls. One afternoon, while placing her newest house on the edge of the porch, a woman from the village walked by. She stopped. "Did you make this?" The girl nodded. "It's beautiful," the woman said, crouching to examine it. "I design real houses, but I've never seen one made with so much feeling." The girl blinked. "They're not real yet, but they will be." The woman laughed softly, not unkindly. "You sound like someone I used to be." She handed the girl a small notebook with blank graph pages. "Draw your next one here," she said. "Maybe one day we'll build it." That night, the girl didn't use cardboard. She picked up the notebook and drew a house with a lavender roof, a round window, a wooden porch, and flower beds shaped like moons. She titled it, "The One I'll Live In." Then she folded the page and placed it inside her pillowcase. "Sleep next to it," her grandmother whispered, "so your dreams can get used to the idea." The days grew longer, and with them, her houses grew more detailed. She no longer needed tape or glowingly vision and faith. Each box became less a toy and more a message, whispered softly into time. She added tiny letters inside some of them, notes to herself that read, "I will live in joy," or "My roof will not leak," or simply, "It's coming." No one else knew what she was doing, but the universe did. One afternoon, her teacher called her aside. "There's a contest," she said. "It's for young designers. You don't have to win, but I think you should enter." The girl hesitated. "I don't use rulers or fancy paper." The teacher smiled. "You use belief. That's rarer." With her grandmother's help, she selected 5 of her favorite shoebox houses and placed them carefully inside a basket lined with fabric. She didn't try to make them look perfect. She wanted them to look true. The day of the exhibition, the other children arrived with sleek models, printed blueprints and polished presentations. She placed her basket on the corner table. Some laughed, but others leaned closer. Adults tilted their heads, eyes softening. "There's something about these," one woman said. "They feel lived in." A man from the city's architecture board stared at the little house with the open roof. "It's simple," he whispered, "but it makes me feel like I've been there before." She didn't win first place, but she won something else. A quiet invitation. A letter arrived the next week, offering her a mentorship program at a nearby design studio. "We don't usually take students this young," it read, "but we believe in seeds." Her grandmother cried, holding the letter to her chest like it was a key. That night, the girl didn't make a house. She stood by the window instead, looking out at the stars. She whispered, "I knew you were listening." Then she smiled and placed her favorite house, the one with the lavender roof on the windowsill. "You go first," she told it. "I'll follow soon." And just before sleep took her, she swore she saw a flicker of light move through the box, not from a lamp, from within. The design studio was quiet and full of light. It didn't smell like paper or glue, but of possibility. On her first day, she was given a small desk and a stack of blank sketch paper. "Draw anything," her mentor said. "We'll worry about the rules later." Her hands hesitated at first, but then they moved like they remembered. She drew curved staircases, round windows, crooked chimneys with stars above them, homes that breathed, homes that listened. The others in the room looked over, curious. "You draw like you've already lived there," one boy whispered. She smiled. "Maybe I have." During a break, she wandered through the back garden and saw a fig tree, just like the one she used to imagine outside her shoebox houses. Its branches curved in the same way. Its roots were just as wide. She touched the bark and whispered, "You came." That evening, her grandmother gave her a small, wrapped package. "For your new room," she said. Inside was a curtain made from the same golden thread the girl had once used on her boxers. "I saved the rest," the grandmother smiled. The girl hung it on the window, which overlooked a garden with moon-shaped flower beds. She stood there for a long time. It was exactly like the one she had drawn. Exactly the lavender roof, the round window. Even the porch railing had the same spiral pattern. For a moment, she thought maybe she was dreaming. But then she heard the soft creak of the floor, the hum of wind through the curtain, and the rhythm of her own breath. No, this was real. And yet, it wasn't new. It felt like home because it had always existed inside her. She unpacked her belongings carefully. At the bottom of her bag was the notebook. She opened it to the page with the house sketch. Holding it against the window, she smiled. A perfect match. Later that night, she took out her last shoebox house and placed it on her shelf. "You're not needed anymore," she whispered, "but I'll keep you as proof." Then she lit a candle, not to see better, but to say thank you, because some dreams don't knock. They enter softly when you've already opened the door. Years passed. The girl became a woman. And though her hands had grown steadier, she never stopped building with wonder. Her home, the one with the lavender roof and the round window, stood at the edge of a quiet field now. Children often passed by, pausing to stare. It didn't look fancy. It looked warm, inviting, like something out of a story they hadn't heard yet. One morning, a small voice called from the gate. "Can I see the house with the moonflowers?" She opened the door. A girl stood there holding a shoebox, taped, colored, careful. "I made one like yours," the child said. The woman bent down and took it in her hands. Inside were 4 rooms, one for music, one for laughter, one for quiet, and one labeled "Someday." She nodded. "This is a good house." The child's eyes widened. "Will it work?" "It already is," the woman replied. That evening, she cleared a small corner of her garden and set out tiny chairs. She began inviting children from the village to bring their boxes. Some came with castles, some with tents. One boy brought only a key and said, "I'm still imagining the door." She told them every dream is a doorway we build not to escape, but to prepare. And they listened, quietly, faithfully, like she once had. In her attic, she kept the old shoeboxes, faded now, but still full of life. Sometimes, when the wind was just right, she could swear they whispered back, not words, but warmth. Proof that even cardboard can become a cathedral when love is folded into its corners. On her birthday, her grandmother, older, slower, but still full of spard, gave her a new gift. A single ribbon, gold, untouched. "For the next house," she said, "whatever shape it takes." That night, the woman sat by her window, watching stars pour over the hills. She thought about how it all began, with money, or plans, or instructions, but with one small box, one small belief, and a girl who didn't know the word manifestation, but practiced it anyway. She smiled, lit a candle, and whispered to the wind, "I am home." They placed her in the very last seat, not because she was tall or quiet, or preferred it, but because no one expected much from her. Her name was Elara. She was the girl who always lost her pencil, the one who stared at the window too long, the one whose test papers came back filled with red marks and sighs from teachers. They didn't say it out loud, but it showed in their tone. You should try harder. Maybe school isn't your thing. Not everyone is meant to succeed. Alara learned to fold her dreams into small paper cranes. She would tuck them into her notebook margins, behind spelling errors and math mistakes. They weren't beautiful, but they were hers each day. She carried shame like a book bag that never lightened, and every report card was a silent reminder, you're not enough. Other kids didn't tease her, not out of kindness, but because they barely noticed her. She became good at disappearing, blending into chalk dust, air, and the humming of fluorescent lights. When asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, she once whispered, "A window." They laughed. She didn't, because to her, windows meant space, light, possibility. But no one taught her how to believe in herself. No one helped her see that her quiet mind was simply speaking a different language. So she stopped raising her hand, stopped trying to belong, and instead began collecting discarded things, bent paper clips, loose notebook, spirals, broken erasers, things others threw away without thought. She would put them in a small box at home. She didn't know why, only that they felt like her misunderstood and overlooked. Years passed. Teachers came and went. Classrooms changed, but the label stuck. Hopeless, slow, invisible, what no one saw, not even Ilara, was that the very parts of her being dismissed were quietly storing seeds, seeds of observation, seeds of imagination, seeds of worth that no grade could measure. And though her self-belief was buried deep, it was never dead, only asleep. And one day, many years later, it would wake. Years slipped by like chalk dust, blown off an empty desk. Ilara became a woman. Not the kind people wrote about, not the kind that entered rooms and changed their temperature, but the kind that moved with gentle caution, as if still unsure she had permission to exist loudly. She worked at a grocery store, stocking shelves, checking expiration dates, folding receipts. The name tag read, Ella. The rest had faded. She liked the night shift. Fewer eyes, fewer questions, more quiet. She'd walk home under the flickering streetlights, her shadow long and uncertain. One night, as she sat at her kitchen table, eating toast with butter and honey, she looked over at the old box she kept since school. The box with bent paper clips, with broken buttons, with snapped pencils and half-erased ideas. She reached inside. Fingers touched a crumpled piece of paper. It was a letter she'd written to herself when she was 11. It said, "Dear me, I think you'll do something special one day. But if you don't, it's okay. Just promise you won't forget to dream." She stared at those words for a long time. A strange warmth stirred in her chest. Not a fire. Not yet, but a spark. That night, she began folding new paper cranes, with shopping receipts, with napkins, with whatever the day gave her. And she whispered to each one, "Thank you for still being here. Thank you for not giving up. You are allowed to dream new things." These phrases became small rituals, soft rewrites of old beliefs. She didn't know what was changing, only that something was not outside, but within. It started with a child, a small girl in the store, clutching a balloon and a broken shoelace. She dropped the lace, looked sad, walked on. Ilara picked it up, carried it home, folded it into a heart, left it on the bulletin board near the bakery counter the next day with a note. Even forgotten things can become something beautiful. She didn't sign it, didn't expect anyone to notice, but someone did. The next morning, there were 3 hearts, one made from a gum wrapper, another from a shopping list, one from foil. The pattern continued, week by week. The board filled with strange creations, hearts, cranes, suns, boats, each one made from something someone almost threw away. A woman asked, "Who's doing this?" Ilara just smiled and shrugged, but her chest held a secret glow. One night, boy came in. He was 12, restless, his hoodie torn. He asked for string, said he needed it for a project. Instead of handing him string, she handed him her box, the one she'd filled since childhood. "Pick anything," he said. He looked confused, then amazed. He picked a bottle cap and a broken key. "Make something out of that," she whispered, "and tell it a good story." He did, and returned the next day with a sculpture. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Others followed. After work, Ilara began hosting quiet circles behind the store, with old paper, broken pieces, words no one had ever been told before. "You're more than your grades. You're allowed to rebuild from what broke. Sometimes the world forgets your worth. Don't let yourself do the same." She wasn't a teacher by title, but she was a teacher in truth. And for the first time, she realized her past didn't define her. It designed her. It began as a whisper in her heart. A question she had never dared to ask. What if I could build something bigger? She started saving again, not just bottle caps and wrappers, but coins, tiny, silent victories. $1 from skipping coffee, $2 from fixing a neighbor's lamp, $5 from braiding a little girl's hair before school. She stored them in an old glass jar, the kind that once held peanut butter. Each time she dropped in a coin, she said out loud, "This is for the space I will create. This is for the lives it will touch. This is proof that nothing is too small to grow." She didn't tell anyone. She just kept going, quiet, steady, certain, until one day, the space appeared. An abandoned storefront, 3 blocks from the grocery store. Dusty windows, cracked tiles, a sign that said, "Vacant." Others saw brokenness. Ilara saw beginning. She rented it, cleaned it, scrubbed every corner as if she were washing old stories away. She painted the walls pale yellow, the color of early morning hope, hung strings across the ceiling, and from them suspended hundreds of her creations. Paper cranes, foil, stars, little messages written on receipts and leaves and faded homework sheets. She called it the Museum of Forgotten Things, but people called it something else. Magic. Children came to build. Teens came to breathe. Mothers came to cry. Fathers came to remember. And Ilara? She stood in the middle of it all, no longer at the back of the classroom, but in full light. A woman once labeled hopeless had become a lantern, not to lead, but to remind. Your value isn't based on how well you fit the world's mold. It's based on what you decide to create. Anyway, the museum grew, but not because Ilara wanted fame or recognition. It grew because people felt something when they walked through its doors. A quiet kind of healing, a soft reminder that their broken parts could still shine. Children began leaving their own creations behind. Teens wrote letters to their future selves and pinned them to the walls. Elders donated boxes of old items with notes like, "This is a piece of who I was. Maybe someone will see it and remember who they are." One day, a journalist visited. He took photos, not of Ilara, but of the tiny objects hanging from strings, each one turning slowly in the breeze like a whispered secret. The article he wrote was titled, "The Girl Who Turns Trash into Gold." And suddenly, people came from other cities, some from other countries. They didn't come to see Ilara. They came to see themselves reflected in the beauty she had built. Donations filled her once empty jar. She opened a second space, then a third. Soon, she was teaching workshops on how to transform the forgotten into treasures. But even with success, she kept her rituals. Each morning, she folded one paper crane. Each evening, she whispered to her reflection, "I am not who they said I was. I am who I choose to be." And in that choice, she became rich, not just in money, though that came too, but in meaning, in freedom, in the quiet wealth of creating something that matters. On the 10th anniversary of her first paper heart, Ilara stood in her museum, alone. After everyone had left, the room was filled with golden light. Hundreds of cranes and stars swayed gently above her. She touched the box she'd kept from her school days, Still holding broken paper clips and erasers, she smiled. "You were never trash," she whispered to them. "You were just waiting for me to see you." And maybe that was true for her as well. Amber's day began like most others in the sleepy town of Maple Grove, Ohio, a place where the mornings smelled of fresh dew on cut grass, and the sound of a single pickup truck could echo down to whole blocks. It was 5:12 a.m. when her alarm rung, a gentle chime, not the kind that startles, but the kind that nudges you softly from dreams. She sat up slowly, stretching her arms above her head, her brown hair a tousled halo of soft curls. A whisper left her lips, half prayer, half habit. "Thank you for another sunrise. I am ready to receive all the good waiting for me." These were words she had memorized since she was 17, left behind by her grandmother in a worn-out blue journal filled with affirmations and stories from better times. Amber rose from bed, careful not to wake her two children, Noah, now 15, and Lily, 12, both still tangled in warm blankets, their faces innocent, unbothered by the world that demanded so much of her. She patted across the cool floorboards of their modest two-bedroom duplex, the old radiator hissing like it was waking too. In the bathroom, she turned on the light, flickered once before settling. She looked at herself in the mirror. Tired eyes, soft laugh lines. A woman who had not yet become everything she dreamed of, but one who had never stopped hoping. As she brushed her teeth, she repeated silently, "I am a magnet for unexpected blessings. Every day, more is unfolding for me." After brushing her teeth and washing her face, she pressed her uniform, navy blue polo shirt with the store's yellow emblem stitched at the chest. Oak Street Market, a small local grocery store, where she'd worked for 7 years. With a hot iron and gentle hands, she smoothed every wrinkle from her work pants. Even if they don't see it, I dress like the owner, she thought. With a soft smile, she prepared breakfast, quietly eggs, toast, and the last bit of orange juice. She scribbled a little note for each child before leaving. "You are loved. You are powerful." Sticky notes of love that had become part of their morning routine. She kissed their foreheads, locked the door, and stepped into the early fog. The walk to Oak Street Market was 15 minutes long, past a hardware store with a squeaky sign, a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon by 6 a.m., and the old movie theater that hadn't played a new film since last fall. Her footsteps tapped rhythmically on the sidewalk, a kind of slow dance with her dreams. Amber always greeted the same bus driver by name. She didn't take the bus, she walked, but he waved to her every morning, and she waved back. They never spoke a word, yet the ritual felt sacred. At 5:47 a.m., she reached the back door of the grocery store. She pulled out her lanyard, scanned her badge, and stepped inside. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. The scent of bread, pine-scented cleaner, and old wooden shelves welcomed her like a quiet hug. She put on her apron, tied her curly hair into a bun, and began her morning routine, facing shelves, wiping the checkout counters, restocking gum near the registers. The hum of the refrigerators in the dairy section became background music to her thoughts. Sometimes she whispered affirmations as she worked. "Money flows to me easily. I am worthy of success. Everything I need is already within me." She didn't say them because she believed them yet, but because she wanted to. Customers started trickling in by 6:30. Mr. Denier, the retired teacher who always bought the same loaf of rye bread. Carla from the salon across the street, who wore cherry-red lipstick and shared bits of gossip with a wink. Amber greeted them all with kindness, not because it was her job, but because she had once promised herself, "No one will leave my line feeling invisible." Behind the counter, Amber had a small notebook she kept tucked beneath the register. Whenever she had a moment, she jotted down ideas. Natural food aisle by window. Community board with local kids' art. Mini library corner for shoppers. Dreams scribbled in between receipts and coupons. One evening, after the store closed, she stayed behind to clean up a spill in aisle 4. On her hands and knees, scrubbing mango juice from the tiles, she laughed to herself. "Even billionaires have to clean up messes," she whispered. "I'm just practicing." That night, as she walked home under a purple sky, she looked up and smiled. A thought crossed her mind, soft, certain. This isn't just where I work. This is where I grow. By the second week of March, the scent of spring had begun to replace the winter. Stillness in Maple Grove. The first yellow daffodils poked through patches of earth beside the sidewalks. Amber noticed them on her morning walk and whispered, "If flowers return after cold seasons, so can dreams." At the store, she was asked to take over as shift lead while her supervisor recovered from surgery. It came without a raise, but Amber saw it differently. Every seed starts small, she told herself as she stepped into the role. She began training new hires, organizing schedules, and even suggesting improvements to the stockroom layout. The manager, Mr. Whitaker, grunted in approval. "You're good at this," he muttered one morning. That was the closest he came to praise, and it made Amber beam inside. One Tuesday, she noticed a customer she hadn't seen before, a woman in her 60s, dressed in an elegant green coat with silver hair swept into a braid. She held a small notepad and walked the aisles, slowly examining every detail. Amber approached her with a soft "good morning." The woman looked up and smiled. "You have a gentle way," she said. "Most people rush, but you observe." Amber blushed, unsure how to respond. The woman introduced herself as Evelina, former shop owner who had sold her health food store years ago and now taught business classes at the community college. "I study places where kindness lives," she said. They spoke for nearly an hour that day, about grocery layouts, customer memory, color placement in merchandising, but mostly about people. "The soul of a store," Evelyn said, "is the person behind the counter, and you, dear, are pure soul." Amber didn't sleep much that night. Evelyn had stirred something in her, a belief she'd hidden deep beneath bills, routines, and silent disappointment, that perhaps she was more than someone who stacked soup cans the next day. She pulled out her notebook and turned to a blank page. At the top, she wrote, "My store." Then she wrote, "A place where no one feels small, where every shelf whispers, care, where success is built on service and softness." That same week, Noah came home with a flyer from school, a small business competition for teens. "You should help me enter," he said. "You're always writing ideas." Together, over cereal and homework, they designed a plan for a mobile grocery app that would connect local stores with elderly residents for home delivery. Amber guided him, but Noah's creativity lit up the room. When his project won first place at the district level, Amber cried. Not because of the prize, but because she saw a mirror of herself in him. someone who had dared to imagine. One evening, as Amber walked to work under a light drizzle, she paused by a closed storefront. The windows were dusty, but the space inside was clean. She pressed her hand to the glass and whispered. Someday, she could almost see her future, their bright shelves, fresh produce, a welcome bell that chimed like laughter. Inside the store, the next day, Mr. Whitaker handed her a stack of inventory reports and mumbled, "I'm thinking of retiring this year. Maybe you'd want to manage full-time." Amber looked at the papers, then at him. She didn't answer right away, but later she opened her notebook and wrote, "I will not shrink to fit someone else's dream. I will build mine." That weekend, Evelyn returned. She placed a worn book in Amber's hands. "Business plans are maps," she said, "but your heart is the compass. Don't forget which direction feels like home." Amber read that book late into the night, and every page whispered, "You are ready." The next month unfolded like a quiet unfolding of pages in a well-worn book. Each day, Amber arrived at the grocery store 15 minutes early, not because she had to, but because she liked the silence before the doors opened. The light filtering through the glass, the hum of refrigerators, the scent of lemons from the produce aislet, all felt like a life that wanted to grow. She began keeping small index cards in her apron pocket. On each, she wrote a sentence that came to her during the day. Even slow growth is growth. Kindness is invisible capital. Every smile adds interest to your emotional bank account. By the end of the week, her pocket was full of truths that hadn't come from books, but from noticing the world. One Thursday morning, while arranging cans on the top shelf, she overheard a customer telling another, "This store feels lighter now, like someone cleaned the air." Amber smiled, knowing it wasn't the air, it was her presence. She had begun to hum softly while she worked. Not loud enough for others to hear, but enough to stir her own joy. That hum reminded her that she was allowed to be here, to exist fully, to take up space. She no longer walked with her eyes on the floor. She looked people in the eyes, especially those who didn't expect it. One evening, as she counted the register till Mr. Whitaker leaned against the doorframe, "I'm serious about leaving," he said. "You're the only one I trust to run this place right, but the rent's going up. I might sell instead." Amber froze. The thought of losing the store, the routines, the customers, the quiet purpose shook something deep. That night, she made tea, opened her notebook, and wrote, "If a seed's home is uprooted, it must still find soil." She circled the word, soil. She started researching. Late nights on the old laptop, watching videos about small business ownership, financing, silent partners. She made spreadsheets she barely understood. She even called Evelyn, who met her at the park with a thermos of cocoa. "You don't need all the money," Evelyn said. "You need belief plus motion. Resources respond to energy." Amber underlined that sentence in her mind around that. Same time, her son Noah received a small grant to develop his grocery delivery app further. "You inspired this," he said, placing the check on the table. "Let's build something together." And so they did. Amber took a leap she never imagined she would. She drafted a letter to a local community fund, explaining her dream of keeping the store open and owned by someone who understood its soul. She submitted her application with hands trembling but heart steady while waiting for an answer. She kept showing up with full presence. She asked customers about their families. She added a community board where people could leave notes or gratitude cards. She even convinced Mr. Whitaker to let her repaint the window frame yellow. "Sunlight belongs here," she said. One morning, as she unlocked the front door, there was a letter slipped under it. It was from the funding committee. She didn't open it immediately. She stood in the aisle beside the lemons, letting the light warm her shoulders. Then she opened it. Approved. Amber didn't shout or cry. She just closed her eyes and whispered, "I will take care of this place, and it will take care of me." She had planted her presence in the soil of small things, and now something new was blooming. Owning the store didn't change Amber overnight. It simply deepened her roots. The first day she stepped behind the counter as the official owner, she wore her favorite blue cardigan, the one with a tiny hole in the sleeve and pinned her grandmother's brooch to it like a quiet promise. She didn't make big announcements. She simply showed up the same way she always had, early, smiling, and curious about others. The regulars noticed something, the new softness in her voice, a grounded confidence in the way she held her clipboard, as if she no longer questioned her place in the story. She added a small corner near the registers with a handwritten sign, "Take what you need." People started dropping off poems, coupons, fresh herbs from their gardens. A child left a crayon drawing of Amber with a big sun above her head. She framed it as the weeks passed. The store transformed not through renovations, but through energy. The shelves seemed brighter. The air carried more than the smell of baked bread. It carried safety. People lingered longer, shared more. An elderly woman confessed, "I come here because it feels like my daughter's house." Amber just nodded, placing a jar of jam into the woman's bag, like a gift from a kitchen that had no walls. But not every day was warm. Some mornings, the register would glitch, deliveries would be late, or customers would arrive angry at the world and take it out on her. Yet, even then, Amber breathed through it. She would look at the stack of empty boxes in the back room and whisper, "These are just tomorrow's shelves." One night, she stayed after closing, sitting on the floor of aisle 3, She had found an old notebook Mr. Whitaker had left behind, filled with notes about margins, staff ideas, customer names. On the back page, he had written, "A store is just a mirror. Fill it with good people, and it will glow." She smiled. That's what she had done at home. Noah's delivery app was thriving. He'd hired 2 local teens and set up a small back office at the store. "This is your ripple," he told her. "Your presence keeps expanding." Amber began to dream more literal dreams. Vivid, colorful, strange. In one, she was planting sunflowers in grocery carts. In another, she watched people walk through the aisles and leave with light in their pockets. She started jotting them down in a journal marked "Subconscious Prosperity." She didn't fully understand what she was creating, but she felt it. One Wednesday, a man in a suit walked in. "You turned this place around," he said. "I work in retail design. I've seen what happens when people put soul before sales." She smiled, humble as always. "I just show up." He offered her a consulting job, training others to build stores that felt human. She didn't say yes, not yet. She needed time to feel into it, to ask herself if her garden was ready to spill seeds into new places. Later that evening, as she closed the door and turned the key, the reflection in the glass surprised her, not because of how she looked, but because she recognized herself. Amber Thompson, once invisible, now magnetic. Amber didn't take the consulting job right away. She spent the next few weeks in quiet contemplation, not thinking, but listening to the wind against the store windows, to the rhythm of footsteps down aisle 4. To the rustling of paper bag, ordinary sounds that had always whispered extraordinary things to her. One evening, a woman came in who hadn't been there in years. She had once been Amber's math teacher, the one who had said, "You don't seem to get it." She didn't recognize Amber, but Amber recognized her. The teacher placed a few things on the counter. Flour, lemons, a candle. Amber rang them up with care and said softly, "Did you ever imagine I'd be here?" The woman paused, then looked more closely. Amber. She nodded. There was a long silence. The teacher's face softened. "I was wrong," she whispered. "You always got it, just not in the way they wanted." That night, she walked home slower, not because she was tired, but because she finally owned her time. Every step felt like a choice, every breath like a declaration. The next morning, she arrived early, as usual, but something had shifted. She removed the sign that said "manager" from her office door. In its place, she hung a new one. It read, "Still growing." She began hosting quiet workshops in the back of the store not about profits or inventory, but about presence. She taught the teens who worked there to breathe before speaking, to notice the eyes of the people they served, to see every can of beans as an opportunity to bless someone's table. One customer began, leaving envelopes with affirmations. Hidden between cereal boxes, another brought books to build a free community library. A woman came in once and said, "I don't need groceries today, just the peace this place offers." Amber understood. The store was no longer just hers. It had become a vessel for remembering, for healing, for returning to the self. Years later, a journalist came to write a piece on her. They asked, "What's your secret to success?" Amber looked around the store, now bathed in soft sunlight, and replied, "I planted light where there used to be absence. I watered silence with kindness, and I let people see me until they saw themselves." The article was titled, "The Woman Who Built a Fortune Out of Whispers." But Amber didn't care about fortune. She cared about the woman who once folded receipts into tiny birds, the girl who thought she was invisible, the clerk who smiled at strangers until the world remembered her name. And somewhere deep in the fabric of every shelf, every receipt, every bag of flour, a vibration remained. You are allowed to grow slowly. You are allowed to dream again. You are allowed to become. And so she did. Every day, in every breath, for the rest of her life.